Prescott on Merseyside. Well, a recent survey by the Association for Public Service Excellence suggests that 8 out of 10 councils across the UK expect to spend less on parks and public spaces in the future. Mo Baines speaks for the Association for Public Service Excellence. Welcome to you and yours. What does your report tell us then about the state of parks and green spaces around the UK?
I think the issue for parks and green spaces is that they are under serious threat due to local government funding cuts. Places like Knowsley, I doubt very much are selling off or looking to sell off parks lightly, but they are facing, like many councils, a dire choice between either running their statutory services, things like social care, or continuing to fund neighbourhood services. They're faced with something of a Hobson's choice, and places like Knowsley, they've lost 100 million in funding in recent years. That can't easily be patched together, and it does put parks and those softer council services in a very, very difficult position.
Does anyone know how many parks are being considered for sale right now?
Well, our own research suggested that 78% of councils don't expect to decrease their overall numbers of parks. There's certainly a changing environment in parks. Some of the bigger parks may have been replaced by things like pocket parks that are brought in through Section 106 funding when developers go into areas. So there's certainly a changing picture in the UK parks. What we don't have available at a national level is a complete register of total parks. We expect something like 27,000 parks to remain roughly the number in Britain.
It's really interesting then, isn't it? Because the research for the BBC, as I said, in the northwest of England, said that half of councils were thinking of selling the parks off. Do you think it's a northwest of England thing?
I think that could be more of an indicator of the levels of deprivation that we see in terms of the way in which funding for local government has been reduced. The poorest areas have been hit the hardest. So in places like Knowsley, in places like Manchester, in places like Sefton, as a proportion of overall budgets, they've suffered more deeply the cuts as a result of austerity. So we could see some patterns emerging where we see differences between the more deprived areas and the better well-off areas that are able to maintain their parks infrastructure.
Aren't there any clever ways of spending less on parks?
There's certainly been a lot of effort by local authorities to use parks for income generation. So, for example, parks are using their assets to bring in concerts, festivals, franchises, cafes. Lots of authorities have brought in a great deal of money with things like garden centres going into parks, so increasing footfall into parks. But nevertheless, most councils still want to maintain the free point of use, so not excessive charging for the public to use parks.
Mo Baines from the Association for Public Service Excellence, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
New rules come in next month.